While there's been plenty of attention paid to the massive deal to bring in Paul George to the Sixers and the re-signing of Tyrese Maxey, there's plenty more work to do on this roster. Part of the problem or the issue with this cap space plan that Daryl Morey has come together is we have wiped the slate blank and Daryl Morey has had to paint from here. Well, he's done a pretty good job to start, as there are a few under-the-radar additions beyond just Paul George and Tyrese Maxey that I think will impact these Sixers' chances in a major way. So I'm going to start off with the first announcement of free agency, what broke things in for the Sixers, which was getting some backup center help with a reunion with Oubre Drummond. Drummond inking a 2-year, $10 million deal with the Sixers. He also did a nice job breaking the news himself a little bit, tweeting out that he was in the mood for a Philly cheesesteak, which I love seeing a little gamesmanship on his part there. We all know the story with Oubre Drummond, that he did spend half a season with the Sixers and was the most productive backup center that we've seen behind Joel Embiid. Now, to preface it a little bit, I do think this is not the most notable guy that we're going to talk about here, and I do think our memories of Drummond are perhaps a little bit fonder than probably should be the case. There's still going to be some wild decisions where he passes a ball he shouldn't or tries to dribble in a way where he probably shouldn't at times, but he is a very good player. And to add specifically what he adds to this team from a production standpoint, we're talking about last year with Chicago, 8.4 points per game, 9.0 rebounds, shot 55.6% from the field overall, 55.8% of his shots being assisted, still 6'11", just 30 years old, not as old as I think he is in a lot of people's heads, but the other part that I will mention here is I do have my concerns about how he fits in a playoff setting. We'll see how things shape out, and that's a problem far in the future. That at the minimum, it's a huge upgrade for a guy in the moments where Joel Embiid is not there, the games that he has to miss because of injury, that Drummond can absolutely fill in and be a starting caliber center in those moments. And the other part to note is Oubre Drummond had his two best seasons the past 2 years as far as rebounding numbers, rebounding percentages is a better way to put it. That last year specifically, he ranked in the 100th percentile in both offensive rebounding rate and defensive rebounding rate, and we know the issues that this team had rebounding the basketball. So welcome home, Oubre Drummond. Good to have you back. And my last point, I know I've brought this up before, but he is a guy who cares about the young guys and was really involved in this team. I've seen him at more Delaware Bluecoats game than any Sixer that I can remember. So shout out to Oubre and welcome home. Now, a bit of a bigger splash that we did see, and this was one of the more up-in-the-air conversation talking points, is Kelly Oubre coming back to the Sixers team. And we did get this upgrade from Adrian Wojnarowski here, saying that ESPN sources, free agent guard Kelly Oubre Jr. has agreed on a 2-year, $16.3 million deal to stay with the Philadelphia 76ers. Deal includes a player option for the next season for the Sixers starting two guard. And I did think that was interesting and notable there, that he does conclude things by mentioning the Sixers starting two guard. So Oubre's played in a little bit of a variety of roles for this Sixers team. There's times where he's essentially been the power forward or four-man in the Sixers roster, and times where he's played as much up to be the two guard. Now, positional versatility is a good thing, that I'm not going to complain about what that is, but I did think that was kind of an interesting way to wrap up that tweet there. And before I dig a little deeper into Oubre's fit here, I also want to acknowledge Eric Gordon coming to this team. That was another addition made. And then we can take a look at the overall offseason recap so far. We've seen Tyrese Maxey on a max extension, Paul George on a max free agent contract, Kelly Oubre on a team-friendly 2-year deal, Eric Gordon on a minimum, Oubre Drummond on a 2-year, $10 million deal, and Jared McCain coming through the draft. Daryl Morey is hot, and there's still some more moves to occur, but I did want to do some proper acknowledgement of each of these. So I mentioned Eric Gordon here. He's a guy who last season averaged 11 points per game, 2.0 assists, 1.8 rebounds, shot 37.8% from three, 44.3% from the field, shot 41.3% on corner threes, 64.2 of his shots coming from beyond the three-point arc there, to which he was a little bit bigger at 6'3", but I am optimistic about what this guy has left in the tank. That I was really impressed with the level that he played at with Phoenix for stretches last season, and I think he will benefit from having a little bit more minimized role on the Sixers team. That the way, somewhat similar to the Sixers, but the way that the Suns have really leaned into things is they've thrown everything at Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. And while the Sixers are of the same concept, essentially, with Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and Paul George here, it does feel like Eric Gordon's a cleaner fit playing around those guys. Then at times he had to bite off a little more than he could chew at moments with that offensive ability or with that Suns team overall. So I am optimistic. And my other point that I want to note with Eric Gordon is 41.3% from the corner last year. That is his worst number in the span of 4 years. That he shot over 50% from the corner each of the past 2 seasons prior to last year. So I am optimistic that with a little bit cleaner of an offensive set and a roster that gels together a little bit cleaner than that Suns team, that number and that efficiency will grow as well. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about these Sixers overall, that these are all good moves, all ones that I do think move the margin, but the work is not done. And to take kind of a look at what we're seeing with this roster as a whole, shout out to Brock Landis who tweeted this out. This is his projection for these starters. That right now is Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. Six-man Kelly Oubre, which I do agree would be the ideal role for Kelly. Oubre Drummond, Jared McCain, Eric Gordon, Ricky Council IV, Paul Reed with a little asterisk because I do think it's likely he is cut, Adam Bona. But Brock's point here being there still need to be two notable additions and likely starting caliber players. I personally think that Oubre is a guy that ends up starting. And to be perfectly honest, I think his fit within the Sixers team could be even better next year than was the case last year. That particularly pairing him with two guys like Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, they're much more of the finesse style of players that they want to get to their spots. They want to dance a little bit with the ball. While Kelly has some of that in his bag as well, he is a guy who wants to be physical, go up and dunk everything, which I love and respect out of him. And I do think that's a nice contrast to have, particularly in the starting lineup there. So shout out to Kelly Oubre for returning. Very happy about that. And to dive into his stats from last year, exactly 15.4 points per game, 5.0 rebounds, 1.5 assists, which somehow is a career high for him, 1.1 steals, shot just 44.1% from the field, 31.1% from three, 33% from the corner, which is not great there. I do wish that number was higher. But what I did see from Kelly were two notable things to take away from last year. Number one, he bought in and did the dirty work. That this guy was willing to defend some high-level players, get his hands dirty, slide with some number one options on opposing teams. Even in the playoffs, I give him a ton of credit for the way that he stuck with Jalen Brunson. And I thought Oubre really embraced kind of the grittiness and dirty type role that he needed to fill for this team. Also, probably earned himself a lifetime contract when he cursed out every referee for that one game, pointed at each and every one of them. We'll never forget that moment there. But the other thing that I thought that Kelly kind of unlocked within his game last year is he was just way more decisive, that there was not as much dancing with the ball. There was not as much pump faking or staring a guy down, that Kelly was a straight line driver where he would get the ball and he would attack the rim and keep the game simple that way. And that was the best version of him as a basketball player. So I do welcome Kelly Oubre back. I do think he's a guy who the shooting I just wish was straight up a little bit better. Like to directly compare these right now, some of the efficiency splits. For Oubre, for example, we're talking about 44.1% from the field, 31.1% from three, 33% from the corner. We're going to compare that with a guy like Paul George here. We're talking about 47.1% from the field, 41.3% from three, and 45.7% from the corner. And even a guy like Eric Gordon, if we want to pull up those efficiency splits, we're talking about 44.3% of the field, 37.8% from three, and 41.3% from the corner. So he's not going to be a spot-up option for this team, and that is not a bad thing, that you do have a little more ability. And in his defense, Kelly Oubre hit some big-time shots last year. That when the moment was large, he did find a way to come through. So I will say he feels like a better shooter than those numbers indicate, and he certainly thinks he is in his own head, which I think is important for as a shooter. Now, I did mention that this team still has to be complete, that there still are roster spots to fill. There are guys that need to be added as well. To take a look at the Sixers cap space here, and shout out to Yossi Goslin, who's the cap guru across NBA circles. He tweets out that at this point, I think the Philadelphia 76ers apron situation is more pressing than their remaining $10 million in cap space. If they cut Paul Reed and Ricky Council IV and trade Jared McCain, they'd have about $11.6 million below the $170.8 million first apron, or $22.4 million below the $188.9 million second apron to field out the roster with expected salaries for Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Oubre Drummond. So you can see a bit of the breakdown for what the estimated salaries for each of these players are. As you can see, they're essentially going to have to fill out a great deal of the roster with some veteran minimum guys, and that is the deal with the devil that you do make when investing this type of capital in such few players. But if it's worth it, it is worth it. I do think we sit more on that side of things there. And the last thing that I'll add to this here is I have no interest in moving on from Jared McCain specifically, that I do think this is a guy who's going to play real deal minutes for this Sixers team. I dove into a little bit more of his film this weekend, and the more I watch him, the better I feel about how impactful this guy can be as a basketball player from day one. He's a dude who loves the bright lights, wants to take the big shots. So even if that means going above that first apron and the restrictions that come on with that essentially makes it more difficult to field some trades, that you can't send out more salary than you bring in, or you can't bring in more salary than you send out, and a couple other factors as far as player options and the exceptions that you can work with, it just becomes more difficult to do some of these dances from a salary cap perspective. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth going all in. And the Sixers have done a really nice job of refusing to go above these lines in year past. This is by far the most restrictive collective bargaining agreement that we've seen in the NBA, and we are already seeing the implications. To be perfectly honest, there's no world which Paul George comes to the Sixers if there were not these restrictions in place and the Clippers had to stare down the barrel, acknowledge that, and allow him to walk because of it. But there has to be a point where you just are willing to pay these types of figures, pay the luxury tax and everything else that comes with it. And that's the spot the Sixers are at. So if there is a year to do it, it is this season, and that is what I expect to be the case. So I would be quite upset if Jared McCabe is a casualty because of that. But ultimately, plenty of work to be done. And just one name that I will float out there that I'm rooting for from a Sixers perspective here, we do have Chris Dunn floating out there in free agency, who is a personal hot favorite of mine. I do think he's a defensive monster who could fill out potentially that other starting guard role or at least a rotational player. That is one guy that I have my eyes on, but still plenty of work to be done. And in Daryl Morey, we trust, as he is on an absolute heater based on all the production of the offseason so far. So I am confident in where they are sitting at this point in time. But let me know what you guys think and name your favorite move so far, excluding the Paul George and Tyrese Maxey max contract deals there. Give me a little one of the other guys. Is it Oubre Drummond? Is it Kelly Oubre? And we are seeing some of these Sixers guys officially decide on other locations. No Nico Batum, no DeAnthony Melton. We're seeing these guys elect to leave, which we do have to understand. There's only so much money for everyone. So much love to those guys there. Tobias Harris, peace out. Enjoy Detroit Pistons there. But ultimately, I do want to hear from you guys for what's your favorite move the Sixers have made so far. Appreciate everyone for tuning into this video here. Make sure you do smash that subscribe button and drop a like if you haven't already. I'll be talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.